Whether you want to backflip off the table away from an orc's axe, or fire a crossbow through the eye socket of that skeleton coming towards you, there are two constant elements that dictate almost everything you do in Dungeons and Dragons, and those are the D20 that we talked about in episode 1 and your ability scores. Your ability scores are used in almost every role that you can be called upon to make in D&D, and today we're going to talk about what exactly they are. Ability scores in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition are broken down into 6 different statistics, which are strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Strength represents how physically strong you are and is used to determine things like how much damage you can do in close combat or how much you can lift and carry. Next is dexterity, which represents your character's reflexes and fine motor skills. Dexterity is used when you fight with most ranged weapons or when you need to do something particularly delicate like picking a lock or sneaking into an enemy camp. Constitution is a representation of your heartiness, how tough you are. Your hit points are affected by your constitution, and a better constitution means you'll have an easier time resisting things like poisons or diseases. Those three make up the physical stats, but just as in the real world, you're not only your body, you're also your mind, feelings, and emotions. So in D&D, you have 3 mental stats as well. First up is intelligence. This is book learning and conventional smarts. You'd use your intelligence to see if you know a piece of history or to see if you can figure out the clues at a crime scene. Next up we have wisdom, which is how wise you are and represents a more subconscious gut feeling a lot of the time. It also represents how attuned you are to the world around you. And finally we have charisma, which is your charm, your wit, and how personable you are. If you need to talk to people to get the job done, chances are you'll be using your charisma score to do it. When you create a character, you'll assign a number to each of these abilities that will impact almost everything you do from that point forwards. But don't worry, even if you have a low scoring ability, there are still plenty of ways for you to succeed at tasks. And besides, weaknesses can be really fun to roleplay. The values for your ability scores can range between 1 and 20, and usually your ability scores are going to sit somewhere between kind of 8 and 15. You determine what values you place in these abilities at character creation, and they can increase as you get more powerful, so long as they don't go over 20. We'll cover all the specifics of that in our future episodes, but for now we just need to assign some numbers to our ability scores. There are 3 major ways that you come up with your ability scores. The most common way is using the standard array. This is a set of numbers which you apply to your ability scores as you please. Next, you can roll to see what your ability scores are. The most common way is to roll 4 6-sided dice and keep the 3 highest. You do that for each ability score and it will give you a range between 3 and 18. And finally, there is the point buy system, which allows you to start with a blank slate and assign the ability scores exactly how you'd like. We're going to cover all of that in future episodes. Then once you've got the value of your ability scores, we need to work out the ability modifiers. As I mentioned in episode 1, anytime you want to do something in D&D that has a chance of failure, you roll a 20-sided dice and apply your modifiers. One of these modifiers that you'll usually apply is your ability score modifier. If the task you're trying to accomplish incorporates one of your abilities, you add the modifier for that ability to the result of the D20 roll. Your ability score modifier is determined by your base ability score, and to calculate your modifier without using the table on page 13 of the player's handbook, you just take your ability score, subtract 10 from the score, and divide the result by 2, rounding down. Changing your ability scores will also change your ability modifiers. So for example, if you had a strength of 13 and you increased it to 14, your modifier would change from +1 up to +2. Now you're going to use these modifiers whenever your character is called on to perform a task using one of their base abilities. This is called an ability check. When making an ability check, your DM will decide which one of your abilities is the most relevant to the task and then set the difficulty class, or DC, to determine the number that you need to overcome to succeed. A good example is trying to kick down a door using your raw brute strength. You'd roll a d20 and add your strength modifier. If you beat the DC set by the DM, you would kick the door open. Sometimes 2 or more characters are going to be directly opposed against one another, and in these situations your DM might call for an ability contest. In an ability contest, both participants roll a d20 and then add their ability modifier. The person that scores the highest wins the contest. Now, the classic example of this is an arm wrestle, where both participants add their strength modifier to their d20 roll to determine the winner, but you can use contests in all sorts of creative ways. A foot race might be a dexterity contest, an eating contest might rely on constitution, or a spelling bee might be intelligence, a rap battle, charisma. There's all sorts of ways to use your abilities. Now, another way you're going to use your abilities is with passive checks. This represents a baseline level of competence in your abilities. A passive check doesn't require any dice to be rolled, rolled, but it represents the things your character would do without any thought or effort. Passive checks are really useful for your dungeon master to kind of secretly determine if you succeed at something without asking for you to roll any dice and ruin the surprise. To determine the total for a character's passive check, you take 10 plus all the modifiers that normally apply, such as ability modifiers or the proficiency modifiers we talked about in episode 1. If there is a hidden threat in the dungeon you're exploring, your DM might use your passive perception, which is based on your wisdom modifier, to determine whether or not you see the threat without actively looking for it. And finally, there may be times where you want to help fellow characters achieve something. To do this, rather than multiple characters rolling dice, the person with the highest ability modifier will make an ability check with advantage to represent their friends helping them. For example, if your group was trying to hold a door to stop a swarm of skeletons overrunning you, the strongest of the party would make an ability check, but they'd get advantage on that roll because at least one other character is helping them. The last big area of the game that is impacted by your ability scores is the skill system, which we're going to dive into in depth in next week's episode. So if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with every episode and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. If you're new to the How to Play D&D series, you can catch all the previous episodes just over here, and don't forget to check out howtoplaydnd.com for loads of extra resources. But until next time, happy gaming.